Hello guys and welcome to the video. I just finished up winning a bunch of MGP, but I'm here today to talk to you guys about where exactly will Final Fantasy Rebirth end. Before, we always had the belief that after Remake we were going to have a 3-part trilogy, and after the information release of Rebirth, that has now been confirmed. So the question is, at what point during the story is Rebirth going to end, and how far will it take us? Shortly after the reveal for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I was watching some streams, and more specifically I was watching Max stream, and one of the discussions they were talking about was exactly what point will Rebirth end, and then we will have the 3rd trilogy to continue on from there. So, long story short, as you can see here, I've already gone through and I've made a list of essentially the 3 parts divided into the sections that they potentially could be. Of course, for Remake, we know that it consists of only Midgar and us finally getting out. For this list, I've gone through and I've separated everything by location, not necessarily by the length of them all, but by all the different locations that we'll visit during the main story of Final Fantasy VII. Now, with this said, for this list, there's no guarantee that for Rebirth and Part 3 that we're going to be following the exact same path, the exact same locations, and things could definitely be different. One of the things here I've done with my list is, one, I've highlighted stuff in yellow for the stuff that I'm really looking forward to, which is cool, but it's nothing really specific to the topic. And then I put things in pink for highlighted for things I thought that were more likely to be either condensed or altogether skipped based off of what they decide to do and how they decide to do the story. So of course, for the sake of everything going down in a list by the order of locations we go to, for the sake of list being in split up by its locations, for Midgar I thought it was only fair to kind of break up all the different things and chapters that we essentially go through in a very short condensed version of it. Because otherwise, you know, if you were just going off a location matching the theme of everything else, well, Remake doesn't look the same as everything else. So, according to the reveal trailer, we know that we're most likely going to be starting off directly in Calm. After the Intrograde DLC, we end up with Yuffie. We see Chocobo Sam dropping off Cloud and the team right outside of Calm, where we know we're going to have the flashback and we're going to have the Nibelheim incident. During the Rebirth reveal, we actually got to see some footage of what looked like Nibelheim and Cloud with Sephiroth going through up to the reactor in Nibelheim. What happens after that can be up for debate. Normally you'd go to the Chocobo Farm, Junon, Costa del Sol, and so on. The ultimate question we're going to have is how much content is going to be forced into Rebirth, and exactly how much is going to be left exactly to fit into Part 3. We only know 1/3 of the equation, leaving 2/3 of it completely unsolved, but we can kind of go off of things and figure out, using what we know off the story, what's probably the most likely situation where we end off in. In my opinion, the 2 most likely areas that we're going to end off at is either going to be the Black Temple or the City of the Ancients. When I was watching Max's stream, they thought that the game would probably end at the crater. So for the sake of how things are split up, I think it ultimately makes the most sense if that's not the case. Because the thing is, if this is the case, right, say if we do end at the crater, the amount of stuff we have here in Rebirth and the amount of things that happen in Part 3, I'm just going to call it Part 3 since we don't necessarily know what the name of it is. Granted, we do have some extra content and side quest stuff to fit in here that I just kind of threw in as weapon fights and extras. If you've played the original, of course you know that that's kind of a majority of the side quests and things to do are during this point. There are different points during the game where you can go back and do other side quests, but the majority of stuff is at the end. But back to what I was saying, splitting it up this way, Rebirth just has too much stuff to put in here. Well, it feels like Part 3 doesn't have as much, which is why I think that the creator, even though it is a good point to end in the sake of like a cliffhanger and part to end on a story, I do think that the City of the Ancients or the Black Temple makes the most sense. Of course, we know the events that happen at the City of the Ancients is going to be the biggest cliffhanger. With the story and everything that's been revealed so far, it's been teased that this is a different timeline, or that there are multiple timelines, and that what originally happened in the original Final Fantasy VII could be very different from what happens here in our story with the remake and Rebirth. So that is a possibility for them to possibly hit us with a cliffhanger and hit us with something different, and kind of hit us with a giant nuke on our minds, just kind of blowing everything that we thought was going to happen out of the water. Who knows? The other one is the Black Temple, is kind of also kind of major point here. Kind of the first big major point that happens right before the City of the Ancients. The thing is, either of these could happen based off how they want to tell the story, because honestly the time it takes to go from the end of the Black Temple to the City of Ancients is not very long. So this is definitely a possibility for City of Ancients. But if I'm a betting man, I'm gonna guess it's either one of these 2 points. Also, with that said, with it split up like this, I think it's a little bit better balanced. If you say we're to end at the Black Temple or the City of Ancients, leaves you with a good amount of stuff to do, compared to how things would be split up between Rebirth and Part 3. How things are broken down and how long they'll be is totally up to interpretation. How things were broken down in a remake was a lot different compared to the original. Say for instance, when it came to climbing up the rubble of the sector going towards the Shinra headquarters, in the original game, that section of the game, essentially where we go from Wall Market and ascending up to Shinra headquarters, in the original Final Fantasy VII takes a couple minutes, as compared to Final Fantasy VII Remake has its own chapter. Takes about somewhere between, depending on how fast you are, 30 minutes to an hour, whether it's either playing through it for a second time or whether it's your first time. So a lot of these things, you know, that I have down here are all up to change, and I'm really curious to see how exactly they spread this out. We do have some of my favorite points in the entire story coming up, which I'm really excited for. How they do Cosmo Canyon and a Golden Saucer, I think could be really cool, depending on how in-depth and how detailed they really want to get with that. But I'm really excited to see what exactly the breakdown is for this. I'd imagine it's also probably going to be quite a few months. I'd expect we'll get more news around E3 of next summer, and more so once we get closer to the release of Final Fantasy 16. When all the information on that is essentially out before release, I think we'll start to get more focus from Square, where they'll start doing more interviews and focusing more on the details for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So let me know down in the comments what you were excited for in Rebirth, as well as where exactly you think the story will end. Like I said, for me, I think it's most likely going to be the City of the Ancients or the Black Temple. City of the Ancients, I think, probably makes the most sense. Also, if you have any ideas or predictions for what you think might change in Rebirth, let me know down in the comments as well. I'm excited to hear what other people think and your thoughts. But with that, that's going to be it for this video. Just a short, sweet video. I'm really curious to see the details on this as we get closer to the release of Rebirth, and I'm sure over time we kind of will get some of these answers before the game's actually out. But until then, all we can do is speculate and kind of use the knowledge that we know from 7 and kind of the themes from Remake to help us figure out what most likely will happen and how exactly far we'll be able to go. But with that, that's going to be it. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe to the channel. It greatly helps me out. I do appreciate it. I will be making more content for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Probably not too much for the time being until we get more information and things on that, as well as finally when we have the release of the game. And also some content on Final Fantasy 16, which will be here sooner than Rebirth. So with that, that is going to be it. I hope you all have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace and deuces.